Hi, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Kayla Boyce, a mentor with Women in Data Science. And in today's video, we'll be discussing an issue that a lot of persons, including myself, encounter from time to time when wanting to explore a data project idea, which is basically figuring out how to start, basically figuring out what the question is. Have you ever had an idea for a project but weren't exactly sure where you should start? Or maybe you even already jumped in but soon realized that the data that you have doesn't quite answer what you thought it would? Well, that's happened to me a few times before, and if it's happened to you, this session is for you. In today's video, we'll be covering 5 topics and they're all interconnected. To start, we'll do a quick recap of your project types. Then, we'll discuss what we can call the project question data chain. Then, we'll get into the topic of proxies and what you can do if the specific data that you're looking for doesn't exist. So we're going to quickly review the 5 project types from our earlier sessions. You've got risk maps, which show you precisely where the danger or the problem is concentrated geographically. Then there's dashboards, which are dynamic, live snapshots of key numbers, which are especially useful for live and continuous monitoring. Service access maps ask the question, who can actually reach the services they need? Policy briefs would transform your evidence into a recommendation, and beyond that, this is where decision making would come in afterwards. Lastly, scoreboards, which would simply track progress over time. Now, the key thing here is for you to pick just one and commit to it, as one of the biggest traps in data science is trying to do everything at once. And I can attest to this. Focus on one thing and get your results. You're far more efficient this way. So this is the core of today's video. And from my experience, it's also where a good bit of projects tend to go wrong. So pay close attention. To explain the concept of getting from the problem to the question, then to the data, we can use a chain analogy for this part. Think about it like this. There are 3 links in a chain: your problem, your question, and your data. Each link must hold or the entire chain breaks. Let's explain this a bit further. So, your problem is the real world issue that you'd like to explore. There's something wrong in the world and it requires attention. Let this be your starting point. Your question is a very specific, answerable version of the problem, more like a focused inquiry that you can actually investigate. And your data is where you have access to, what you have access to, not assumptions, what you can actually get your hands on. Here's the key question to ask yourself. Does my data actually answer this question, or am I just hoping it does? It's an honest question that you need to answer honestly, but doing so helps you so much to ensure that you're on the right track. I've had to ask myself this question so many times, and it helped me to realize sometimes that the data that I have isn't actually going to help me understand what I'm trying to ask. Well, that is perfectly fine as long as you catch it early and before you've actually already spent several hours of your time building something. So before you move forward with your project, trace this chain: problem, question, data. Does each link connect to the next? Because if one link breaks, go back to fix it. Now we need to talk about scoping. Now, this note is important. Make your questions small enough to answer well. Let me give you an example of a question that's too big. How can we fix climate change in small islands? Now, although that's a very real and important question, it's impossible to answer as a data project question because it's too broad, it's too vague, and there's no actual data you could pull together to address it. Scope it down to something like this instead. In which 3 coastal parishes did flood damage correlate with informal housing in 2022? Specific geography, defined time period, a clear relationship to explore, and it's answerable. So before you finalize your question, run it through the scoping checklist. Can it be answered in your time frame? Is the geography specific? Is there a defined time period? Is the data actually available? And can you say it in one sentence? Keep this in mind. 10 minutes answering well is better than 10 hours answering vaguely. If you can check all five of those boxes in this checklist, then you know you're in good shape. So here's an important skill that doesn't get as much attention as it should: proxies. You may find that sometimes the data that you want doesn't exist yet. And when it comes to Caribbean data, the data gaps may be a bit more prevalent. So in that case, you find a stand-in, a proxy. For example, you might want income inequality data, but it might not be available at the district level. So you may use utility disconnection rates by district instead. While it isn't necessarily the same thing, it still signals financial stress within a community. Another example is if you want disability access data, you may look for accessibility complaints filed with local government instead. And if you're looking for literacy rates by gender, school dropout rates disaggregated by sex can give you a meaningful proxy. The key thing is to keep in mind, the key thing to keep in mind is to always state your proxy openly and be transparent. You must say something along the lines of, I'm using X as a proxy for Y because the direct data isn't available. Never pretend the proxy is the thing you wanted to measure because your integrity depends on that honesty. Now, let's talk about something that isn't talked about enough either: the question we ask. And the people we make visible in our data have real life consequences. Data is not neutral. Before you look to finalize your research question, ask yourself three sets of questions. On gender, is the data split by sex or gender? Who bears more of the burden you're studying? And would a proposed solution affect women, men, or non binary people differently? Second, on disability. Are people with disabilities included in the data at all? Is the barrier you're studying actually worse for someone with a disability? Maybe if access itself is the problem. And when it comes to the invisible disabilities, think mental health conditions and chronic illnesses. Are these being counted? Third, on underserved communities. Who is being excluded from official data altogether? Is there a rural versus urban bias in what's being collected? And whose voice is missing from the story? These are questions that make your work more accurate, more relevant, and more impactful, and you must ask them before you finalize your research question, not after. So now we're coming down to the end of this video, so let's bring everything together. Here's your checklist before you build. 1. Pick your project type: map, dashboard, policy brief, scorecard, or service map. Pick one. Number 2, follow the chain. Problem leads to question, question leads to data. Does it hold? Number 3, scope it down. Specific geography, defined time period, one sentence. Number 4, name your proxies. Be honest about what your data can and can't say. And number 5, ask whose experience is missing: gender, disability, underserved communities. Your activity from here is to do this. Write your research question, run it through this checklist, and share it with your team. This conversation that you'll have with your team will sharpen your project significantly, so don't neglect having that conversation. Okay, well, that's it from me for today's session. I hope this gave you a bit of a clearer picture of how to move from a big mess of your curiosity and thoughts into a more focused and grounded research question. Good luck and take care.